Hello, wonderful students. This is the first lecture of Biology 103. If you remember, we ended 102 with a little tiptoe through the phyla. In our last lecture of 102, we were talking about plants as well as fungi. So for this first unit of 103, we're going to cover plants in a little bit more detail. We're going to talk about their anatomy and their physiology, as well as how they reproduce. This first lecture corresponds with chapters 27 and 28 in your textbook. So let's start with a really brief overview of how plants are put together. This is something you may have learned in kindergarten if you ever planted a bean in a little paper cup. Oh, hey, we did that first term, didn't we? So on a plant, you have the part above ground is collectively referred to as the shoot. That's the leaves, the stem, all of that good stuff. And then the stuff below ground is the roots. Hope I didn't blow anyone's mind there. I hope we're still on the same page. All right, now let's get a little bit more in depth. You see, plants don't have organs. You think about it, they don't have hearts and lungs and spleens like we do, but they do have cells that work together for certain purposes, and those are called tissues. There are three main tissue types in a plant: the vascular tissue system, the dermal tissue system, and the grab bag, known as the ground tissue system. So the ground tissue system is pretty much everything that's not in the other two categories. This does photosynthesis, it's storage for the plant, and it's its structural support. The vascular tissue system distributes water and minerals, as well as food. I think you guys remember that a little bit from last term. And finally, the dermal tissue system. Now, this comes from the same word that we get for our epidermis, our skin. This is basically the skin of the plant. It's the tissues that cover and protect the exposed surfaces of the plant. So those are kind of like the tissue systems, kind of like the tissue primes, the three major types. Now we're going to talk about some specific plant tissues in a bit more detail. We've got a picture here of a microscopic view of a plant. We've got here the parenchyma. Parenchyma is thin-walled, flexible cells. They're alive in the mature plant. Now, this is kind of weird because all of our cells are alive, except maybe our fingernails. I'm not really sure about that, honestly. It's a little weird that we have little scales at the tips of our fingers. Anyway, plants, yes. Parenchyma is alive and mature tissue, so it's used to fix wounds. If, like, my husband mowed the lawn yesterday, and so the parenchyma of the grass seed, the grass plants in our lawn were able to scar over the top and keep the grass from dying. Mesophyll is a particular type of parenchyma, and these cells are photosynthetic. So I think of it, P stands for photosynthesis, P stands for parenchyma. All the parenchyma cells are photosynthetic. Well, no, all the photosynthetic cells in the plant are parenchyma. They don't just do photosynthesis, they do other stuff too. Collenchyma are elongated cells. They're also alive in mature tissue, and these are like the Spanx of the plant. They're stretchable, they support the growing plant parts. So they help give the plant flexible structure, like if you were wearing something like spandex, kind of. That's what collenchyma does. Sclerenchyma is your fiber. This is the part that your body can't digest, so when you eat, the celery, it just goes right through. Sclerenchyma cells have various shapes, but they're dead at maturity. So the purpose of these plant cells is to die. And the wall of the cells are rich in lignin. That's a type of wood, and it gives it a woody type tissue, like substance. So what this does is it makes the cells remain rigid. It gives their shape and strength to the plant. So this is kind of like the plant's skeleton, only, not really, because plants don't have skeletons. So you guys have met the vascular tissue last term. Here there is a kind of cross through this bundle of vascular tissue. Here we have some sclerenchyma. It goes all the way around the vascular tissue. That's the rigid dead cells for support. We've got some parenchyma around in case, oh, I'm going to have to get used to a Mac mouse for this. All right, so here we have the big tubes here are the xylem. That's what moves the minerals from the roots to the shoots. And then we have the phloem in here, and the phloem is what moves the food down from the leaves. Remember, class, food phloem down. The dermal tissues have the epidermis, and the epidermis secretes a waxy cuticle. I wish mine did. That sounds like fun. Anyway, plants are covered with a thin layer of wax to a thick layer of wax. The shinier the leaves are, the waxier they are. And that protects the plant. They also have stoma. The plural of stoma is stomata. These are specialized holes. They're surrounded by the guard cells here. These allow gases in and out of the leaf. Okay, so here's a picture showing you a cross-section through some celery. We've got the epidermis here, keeping the celery, nice and fresh. We've got our sclerenchyma, our fiber cells. This is, when you peel the celery and they're like, when you're just sort of playing with it because you don't want to eat it because it's celery, and you have those little strings that come out. The string is the sclerenchymas. The sclerenchyma sections here, and those are supporting the phloem and the xylem. We've got the parenchyma here. Do you see how the parenchyma is green? Why is it green? It's because it's undergoing photosynthesis. So that kind of shows you how the different plant tissues all work together to make a plant. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the shoot. Here we have the tip of a plant. This is its terminal bud, and this is the primary area of shoot growth. Remember when we were, I guess we don't do that lab anymore. But anyway, if you're looking for a place where a lot of cells are undergoing mitosis, where cell division is happening, that's going to be at the tip of the plant. This area is called the apical meristem. Apical because it's at the apex, it's at the top, and the meristem is a zone of growth. So this is where the cells are rapidly undergoing mitosis, and this is where the plant is growing up. The lateral buds here, these are the starts of side branches, leaves, or flowers. So this is another place where there's meristem. This is a place where the plant is growing. And then, of course, you have the vascular bundles on the inside. There's some, and there's some. Okay, the meristem is where the cells divide rapidly and become many different types of cells. So this is where the stem cells are. The apical meristem lengthens it. So apical meristem makes things grow up and makes things grow down. You can find it at the bottom of the roots, and you can find it at the tip of the shoots. And right here, this is the root cap. This is like the plant's little toenail here. These are dead cells that cover the tip so that when the new cells are dividing, the baby cells don't get smushed. This dead crap does. Pretty neat. All right, primary growth is the seasonal lengthening of shoots and roots via apical meristems. So this is how plants grow first. But if they just had primary growth, they'd be real long and skinny and weedy, and they'd blow over. So there's also a secondary growth, a thickening of the roots and the shoots. This thickening is caused by a band of stem cells called the lateral meristem. This is a thin cylindrical layer of cells in woody plants that divide to thicken the roots and shoots. Okay, so another word for the lateral meristem is the cambium. Here we've got some cambium cells. They're stem cells and they're dividing. After they divide, some of these will differentiate and they will become, ooh, X1. What do you think that stands for? You're right, it's totally xylem. Now, the parenchyma, or sorry, not the parenchyma, the Cambrian cell divide again, and this one here, see this guy? He differentiated into phloem. So now this one's going to divide again, and it'll make more xylem and more phloem on either side. So the phloem that stays alive is the one that's newly formed, the newer cells that are near the lateral meristem here. The ones that are on the outside, the older ones, end up getting clogged and they become merge with the dermal tissue to become bark. And on the inside, the newer xylem is the stuff that still works and still carries water. The older xylem ends up dying. Whoop. The older xylem ends up becoming the wood. Yeah. So here we've got the lateral meristem. This phloem is right here, and then the old clogged up phloem becomes part of the bark. So this is why if you decide to scratch you and your honey's names into the side of the tree, it'll start oozing sap. The sap's coming out of the phloem. Inside the phloem is the lateral meristem. That's the cambrium, the stuff that's growing. And then here we have the bands of xylem that form on the inside. This part here, this is the sapwood, the new xylem. It's sapwood because there's still stuff going through it. There's still water moving. The inside is the heartwood. This is old damaged xylem. It's clogged, and so trees like me are dead at heart. This is why you may have seen, a hollow log, or if you've ever hiked the redwoods, you'll see trees where the inside is dead and like lost in a fire and the outside's still going strong. It's just because the inside of trees aren't alive anymore. That's really weird to think about. Okay, so tree rings are made of xylem. In most areas of the world, early spring is where it is the rainiest. So this is where the tree has plenty of liquid. So it needs big straws to suck it up. It makes lots of large xylem tubes to take up the water from the spring rains. But in late summer, there's less water, so the xylem tubes made are smaller. So you have a band of early ones and a band of late ones. So the early ends up being lighter in color because the tubes are bigger, and then the late becomes darker in color. So you can actually see the history of the tree in the tree rings, which is pretty cool. So, whoop. All right. Here we have a tree. This tree happened to live in Virginia, and when they cut it down, look here. You see these real small bands here? This year here, tons of rain. Crops are happy, everything's good. This year here, not so much. So this is when Roanoke, the first colony in the New World, was formed. It was not a good year. Like, everybody died and or ran off and joined the natives. That colony failed. And then poor old Jamestown, that was the second colony. Look what happened here. If Jamestown had been founded here, wow, they could have had years to, grow crops and store up grain. But instead, when they founded that colony, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of bad weather. Maybe even this sixth year wasn't so great either. So if the English had timed their colony formation a little bit better based on the weather, we could have had U.S. history change quite a bit. We could have, colonized the New World in the, the late 1500s instead of, the late 1600s, mid to late, I think. I don't know. I'm Scottish mainly. Okay, modified stems. Stems normally just do stem type things. They, hold the leaf, hold the leaves up, that sort of thing, main body of the plant. But stems can be modified to serve other purposes. So stolons are runners. This is an example of a stolon. These have nodes that sprout, so they can actually sprout a new plant. If you've ever had a spider plant, you've seen these. The spider plant will grow long stems, and then they'll have these little spiderlings that grow off the side. Rhizomes are another kind of modified stem. They're underground, but they're not roots. These are fleshy, scaly stems that grow under the soil. Ginger is, well, this is a ginger plant right here. When you're eating ginger, you're eating either the fresh cut underground scaly stems or the dried and powdered version. Bulbs are underground stems encased by overlapping modified leaves called scales. So the onion and the ogre have many layers. Each of the layers of the onion was a modified leaf, so each one is a scale. This is used for storing starch, and it's to keep the onion going through the winter. So in the spring, it can just, sprout out the top. If you've ever left an onion for too long in your cupboard, you'll find that it sprouts out here. And of course, you have the roots on the bottom. Corms are thickened underground stems that store nutrients. This is taro. This is what the native Hawaiians used to make poi. For some reason, after you cook it, it's kind of bluish and tastes of Play-Doh. At least that's what it reminded me of. It took me all the way back to preschool. Good times. All right, tubers are thickened underground stems that store food. They have nodes, and an example of a tuber is a potato. So on the potato, each one of these eyes is a node. So if you let your potatoes go too long, the eyes will sprout. And if you want to plant more potatoes, you can actually cut a potato up, and so long as the piece has an eye on it, it will sprout and you'll get a new potato. We used to farm potatoes when I was a kid, not for any reason that I could tell. I think they were trying to show me where food came from, but I remember the reseeding of the potatoes. All right, enough about my youth. Cladodes are thickened photosynthetic stems that store water. So a cactus doesn't actually have leaves. It just has well, the needles would kind of be modified leaves. The fleshy, paddly parts are the cladodes.